Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're talking about compound verbs, and you can find this in your book on page 126. Okay, a compound verb is a preposition plus a verb, where the preposition acts as a prefix. Right? Most of our prefixes in English come from Latin prepositions. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of examples of compound verbs, and we're going to start with as our base verb woco, which of course means to call. Okay, now I'm going to attach prepositions to the verb woco. So my first compound is going to be odd woco. And the principal parts are the same as woco, so it's ad woco, ad vocare, ad vocavi, ad vocatum. Okay, so the principal parts usually don't change in a compound. Okay, so ad voco literally means to call to, right? Woco means to or towards, and so we're essentially just adding that meaning to the verb. So if you're calling somebody over to you, you would use the verb ad woco. And this works with lots of different prefixes, prepositions. So I could say a woco, and this is to call away. So say you're having a conversation with somebody and somebody else calls you away. Notice that we dropped the B. Okay, so ob plus woco gives us a woco. And that happens sometimes in compounds. You drop out the second letter of a preposition. That's very common. Okay, another example of this. A woco. Okay, so this means to call out. Okay, and a woco is a combination of x plus woco. And again, so we're dropping out the x in the preposition. And let's see, one more, con woco. Okay, con, whenever you see con in a Latin verb or even in an English word, that is formed from cum, so it's cum plus woco. And the cum here has a special meaning. I mean, cum of course means with, but in compounds it usually means together. Okay, so that's important to note. So con woco is actually going to mean to call together. Okay, compounds are where we get lots of derivatives, by the way. So from con woco we get convocation. Convocation is a big meeting, an assembly, and so literally it means a calling together, con woco. Okay, there are lots of verbs that that are root verbs for compound words. So I'm just going to give you a couple more, and you'll find a full list of these compounds at the end of the book in the grammatical appendix. Okay, so just a couple more examples. Let's use the verb moeo. Okay, moeo, to move. Okay, so we have odd moeo, which, as you can imagine, means to move towards or to move to. A moeo, to move away. Per moeo, which means to move through. Sometimes compounds pick up different meanings. So there's com moeo, which means literally to move together, but also to alarm or to stir up. So sometimes the meaning of a compound is very obvious, and sometimes it takes on a special meaning like commoveo. But if you think about a derivative, commotion, right, comes from this. And so if commotion is something that it stirs you up. Okay, and notice that instead of conmoveo, it's commoveo. So what happens is instead of the con, it changes to a com because the first word of the verb is an m. That is what's known as assimilation. Okay, so when the last letter of the preposition or the prefix drops out and becomes the same as the first letter of the verb. That's a really common thing to see in Latin compounds. Okay, let's look at the verb yakio. Yakio, to throw. Okay, yakio does a really interesting thing in its compounds. So it becomes ikio. It goes from yakio to ikio. So ad yikio means to throw to. Okay, and this happens in basically all the compounds. So ab yikio would be to throw away. The same thing happens in the compounds of capio. Okay, so capio would become, here's an example of a compound of capio, incipio. So capio becomes cipio. Basically what happens is the A is becoming an I. Okay, incipio means to begin. That's a really common thing to see in third conjugation IO verbs. It happens in compounds of the verb facio as well. So facio meaning to do. For instance, we have the compound perficio, which means to finish or accomplish. So again, the A is dropping out in favor of an I. And of course, these are all third conjugation IO verbs, right? Yakio, facio, capio. It's a very common thing to see in third IO verbs. Okay, last two compounds I want to talk about. Okay, ignore this. Last two compounds I want to talk about are odd sum and ob sum. Okay, these are both compounds of sum. And so odd sum means to be here or to be present. I am here. And ob sum means to be away. They're essentially conjugated like sum. So if we were to conjugate odd sum, it would be odd sum in the present tense, odd s, odd est, etc. Right? And the imperfect would be odd eram, odd eras. Right? So it's pretty simple. You just take the prefix and you add it to sum. Ob sum does something a little different in its principal parts. It's ob sum, ob esse, and then it goes to a fui and a futurum. So it drops out the B in the third and fourth principal part. That's a really, really minor thing, so not something to be too concerned with. And that's essentially it for compound verbs, and thanks for tuning in, and see you again next time.